Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the online public meeting for the Response Activity Plan for 2400 Lakeshore Drive, Muskegon. My name is Mike Gurney. I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division, and I'm going to be kind of behind the scenes, hopefully just supporting the function of today's meeting, all the Zoom things that happen along the way. I've got a couple housekeeping items that I'd like to address before I hand it over to Jay Pole and Karen Vorst to get us started here this evening. So, first up, we are recording this meeting, so we will be able to share a recording link with you all and anyone who registered for the meeting but wasn't able to attend. We'll have that posted on YouTube, hopefully within 24 to 48 hours. We do expect to send an email to everyone who registered for or attended the meeting tonight with not only a link to the recording, but a copy of the presentation slides from tonight, as well as any links that we talk about, any additional information, any FAQs that we think are appropriate after the discussion tonight. All lines are muted during the presentation and they're going to remain muted so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We still want to hear from you though. So please use that Q&A box throughout the presentation. That'll be available the entire evening. So you'll be able to ask questions through that Q&A box. I do want to acknowledge we did have some questions submitted during the registration. So I appreciate that. That was helpful for a couple reasons. Obviously, to focus the presentation tonight to better help us understand what you are hoping to learn from us, but also as a reminder that tonight is really just to kind of set the stage, really focused on the response activity plan that was recently submitted for the site and the contaminants and the contaminant pathways that are addressed in that plan. So I know you might have a lot of questions, questions about contaminants, contaminant pathways that are not addressed in that plan. And so we'll make sure to provide as much contact information and follow-up notes as we can. Tonight, though, there's some background information that is going to be provided, and then a discussion on that response activity plan. And so we really are going to do our best to try and focus that conversation tonight on that plan, and the specifically to help us through this public comment period that we're in right now. We're accepting public comments on this response activity plan. So with that, I will stop talking, stop sharing, and hand it over to Karen and Jay.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. Good evening on this really nice September 30th warm September evening. All right, Jay, you got the slides up. We're
Yep, I
ready to
think you
go.
should be good to go. Yep.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, as Mike said, my name's Karen Vorse. I am the district supervisor here in the Grand Rapids District Office of EGLE, specifically the Remediation and Redevelopment Division. I also have here with me Jason Pohl. He'll introduce himself in a little while too. Um, and we're talking about the former SC Warren SAPPI paper mill site here at 2400 Lakeshore Drive in Muskegon, which I think all of you are pretty familiar with. Long industrial history that we'll get into a little bit. Um, so enough about me and Jay. We will have a panelist for questions at the end. I just want to kind of name them out so you'll be able to put faces with names. Everyone kind of has an area of expertise that has been involved with the review of this response activity plan or this site or project as a whole. So those folks are Jeff Hugel. He's with our Brownfield section of the Remediation and Redevelopment Division. He is the grant administrator for this site. There is a special appropriation grant that is being used out at the site for some work. And he is kind of the keeper and administrator of that. We also have Nick Swiger, professional engineer. He is our manager of the technical support section within Remediation and Redevelopment Division, or RRD. He's on. He can answer certain questions about our guidance that we have related to methane and other vapor intrusion questions, as well as Sam Buski, another PE here we have in our technical support section, and he is our subject matter expert when it comes to methane. We also have Brent Ritchie. He's in the Grand Rapids District Office along with me. He is our acting assistant district supervisor right now, but also a senior geologist and our VI expert within our district. And we also have Lynn Gossen. She will be on the panel. She is here in the district with me as well. She's our district enforcement coordinator. So she is looking at, if you saw a part of this plan, there's a draft restrictive covenant that would be registered on the property deed. And so her focus has been mostly on that restrictive covenant. So we have her on as well in case we get any questions related to that. So why exactly are we here? You saw who all is here, but why? So we want to discuss the plan, kind of give you an overview of the meat and potatoes of what's in this response activity plan, what pathways is it covering, what is it not covering. We also want to be clear on what it's not covering and the other contaminants that remain out on the site. We want to provide useful background information and some basic general overview of the historical information best as we can over 100 years, of heavy industry out there. We just want to make it clear this specific plan that was submitted is focused on the vapor intrusion pathway or the vapors that are present at the site. Um, we do anticipate many future meetings, especially if this project, continues on and other things that are occurring at the site. We anticipate this to be the first of many meetings to talk about additional site contamination out there, including PFAS. This is an MPART site of the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And so we found PFAS out at the site, I think back in 2016. And so it has its own website dedicated regarding the PFAS. So we anticipate additional conversation on that. It's not part of this response activity plan. We want to explain how you can provide your written comments and where to submit them to make sure they get to the right place to where we can review them. And then if you have questions, write them in the chat. You can also follow up with any of us after the meeting. This is being recorded. It will be posted. We'll share the link with you after. But we want to try to answer as many questions as we can in the amount of time we have tonight. And just to kind of set the stage for this response activity plan, us here in the Remediation and Redevelopment Division, we have kind of two main environmental laws that we oversee. We call Part 201, which is environmental remediation, also Part 213. That's leaking underground storage tank sites. We're not going to be talking about that one. The legislation that's really governing this is the Part 201. So when we say Part 201, we're talking about our environmental laws that apply. And then also you hear us talk about due care obligations, Section 7A compliance, those words. That is referring to what any property owner who operates or owns a site that's contaminated, even if they didn't cause the contamination, but they own or operate it, they have obligations under 201, specifically Section 7A. And so we'll go into that a little bit about what those obligations are and how that kind of comes into play specific to the vapor intrusion risks out there. But we just wanted to highlight this. You'll get the link to it. You can scroll and look at that a little bit more too. And I'm going to hand it over to Jay to continue on with the background.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So yeah, just to kind of build on what Karen was saying there too about Part 201 and kind of how we are, where does RRD fit into this picture? And so maybe some of you are familiar here with the water cycle with our happy sunshine there and kind of where water goes in the environment. And I just like this picture because it shows kind of all the little worlds that we're in EGLE, including for example, oh, I got to get my control back here. Here we go. Air quality division. I like to kind of equate them with the top half of this drawing here. The water resources division. They have some involvement out here too, not for this particular submittal, but they do the rivers, the inland lakes, and so forth. They're dealing with industrial facilities and some of that stormwater runoff and any infiltration that might occur in there. And then remediation redevelopment division, where we work, and those the Part 201, 213, et cetera. Those really deal here with contamination that's on the ground, in the ground, underground, the soil gas, which you'll hear us talking about a lot. That's the vapors that come off from chemicals that are in the ground. And then we kind of end where that groundwater flows into these surface waters right at that groundwater surface water interface. And so you'll hear us talk a little bit more about different pathways, but thinking about the drinking water pathway and the groundwater surface water interface pathway, vapor intrusion, those are different pathways that we deal with. We'll talk more about that later. So yeah, those pathways, those exposure pathways, they're kind of built on a process. How do you get exposed to contamination out here? So when we start talking about this response activity plan, we're really talking about what we know about the contamination out there, and then the goal here. So what are the sources of those contaminants? Where are they in the environment? And then how might somebody get exposed to them? So a lot of times we think of the drinking water pathway. Well, so it can come out of a factory, it can go into the water, somebody could possibly drink it. And then who is that somebody? Who are the people who are potentially exposed out there? And so you can boil that down one more. You got source, root, receptor, right? You've got the source of the contamination, where that contamination is traveling and how it might get to that receptor, and that's the people. And I like to think about a roadway. Um, the source of hazards in a roadway might be the cars. Those are contaminants. The root, of course, is the road itself, and the receptors would be a pedestrian in that roadway if you were worried about somebody getting hit by a car in there. So if we can effectively make sure people can't get in the road, that's a way that we can make sure those people aren't impacted by the cars in the road. So that's maybe a little bit oversimplified, but in my brain, that's kind of how I like to think about it there. So out here at the former SD Warren SAPPI paper mill site, we know we have some chemicals down there that are above our exposure uh, uh, screening levels and cleanup criteria for the volatilization to indoor air pathway and fire explosion risks. We know we don't have drinking water, that the site's going to be currently there's no drinking water, and the plan is to have municipal water supplied out there. There is a chance that people could be exposed to the soil out there in the majority of the property. And some contaminants are present at various depths above the direct contact pathway. There have been some soils that at various historic depths and current depths that might be above the PSIC, the particulate soil inhalation criteria. Although I think most of those soils at this point now are below the surface, and the potential for airborne dust particles to impact people is low to non-existent. Same with the volatilization to ambient air. It's a pathway that we need to worry about, but I don't think we have any soils out there anymore that are above that criteria. But we do know that the site is surrounded by surface water. We've got Muskegon Lake out there, and more on that to follow. So we know that there is definitely a chance for us to expose the contaminants in the groundwater to the groundwater surface water interface. So that's kind of a background there to the contamination out there and how we're viewing the site from the source root receptor uh, concept there. But a little bit more about the site itself. And some of you have seen versions of this presentation in the past. This has got a long, very interesting history. I guess if you're a history nerd like me, about development out there, and this goes way back to actually just prior to 1900. It's been a paper mill, sawmill. They did some chemical tanning. They made some chemicals out there, and they made pianos. It's a pretty large site, 123 acres overall, and over 80 acres of those consist of fill or man-made land. And so a lot of work has been done over time there. And sadly, that went out of operation in 2009. And so then the next, you know, nearly 2 decades now has been focused on the demolition and cleanup, and now the redevelopment of the property. So a lot of the details that we started to get about the remaining contamination out there started to trickle in the 20 teens. And we did find a series of chemicals here that we'll be talking about later. And then they did do some remediation out there. And they also have now secured the site. So at this point, we're looking at a prospective purchaser and the work that they want to do out there. So just to take you through the time machine a little bit more, here's another picture of the property. I put a dashed line on there that will kind of get you. See if I can get my pointer going here. This laser pointer, there it is. So this dashed line, that's going to be about the eastern edge of the property when we start to look at some of these future air photos. And this becomes, you can see this break wall, excuse me, way out here will gradually, currently it's being used to shelter logs. If we could zoom in a little bit more on this image, you could see that there's actually logs floating inside this break wall. There's actually a steamship right out there, which is kind of neat. And so they would take logs in off from Muskegon Lake and they would process those in the factory here. Sadly, it's not all fun steamships and logs floating. We do see quite a bit more filling occurring in there now. We've got a ship in the coal slip here. There's coal pile. There's still some open water kind of within that break wall over there, but we start to see some wastewater handling in this portion of the site. Excuse me. And that actually vents out into Muskegon Lake up here. So this is just a few years later. So that's a big change. And again, here's a line that kind of shows where the historic property shoreline used to be. The railroad lines are generally up here on the more stable shorelines. This is way upland. Here's Lakeshore Drive down here at the bottom of the screen. And then you can actually see that they've got their boilers going right now for the plant right there with the smoke or the steam smoke coming out of the stack. By about the mid 50s, quite a bit more development. We've got our coal pile up here, some changes to the coal slip and what becomes the surge basin. We also see lime pile out over here. And then this sinuous canal is going to be something we'll discuss here more. This was a wastewater settling canal that came out of their processing plant and then ultimately come discharged around and into Muskegon Lake. And then fast forward one more shot. This is basically the configuration of the property right before it was shut down. And we see a lime pile. Lime was used for the process. We've got significant amounts of coal here. This western portion of the property was used for wood and wood chips, kind of the receiving end. The facility itself, the factory itself to make paper is in through here, kind of the heart of the property. Out here, we've got some wastewater treatment and then lots of support buildings, including maintenance buildings, wastewater treatment buildings, the power plant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots. This was basically nearly a self-sustaining facility. And once the modern environmental regulations came in, they did some pre-treatment of their wastewater, and then ultimately wastewater and stormwater from the site was pumped off-site and sent to Muskegon wastewater treatment plant for final treatment. This area here on the right, you see that sinuous canal is now gone. And in fact, the edge of the property used to be in here, and now it's filled all the way out to that dashed line that I showed you earlier. So again, the shoreline being back in here. All of this history here, we call these recognized environmental conditions. A lot of these are recognized environmental conditions it's a fancy technical term that we use for activities at a property that could result in contamination to the subsurface. So, things like ponds and tanks and maintenance areas and filling, et cetera, all of those things represent potential sources of contamination. And so those are sources that we wind up investigating as environmental scientists. And then you just kind of boil those down again. We've got our lime, coal pile, coal storage. The surge basin was called the surge basin that held wastewater that was partially treated, and then they would send that to the wastewater treatment plant in batches. Here's the old underground sinuous canal, and then the east fill area that was again filled in with a lot of on-site and off-site waste materials and so forth. This particular picture is interesting because it actually captures the property while they had some groundwater treatment infiltration lagoons in here based on some of that PFAS treatment experimentation that they had done out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think was it just nearly 25 million gallons of water, PFAS impacted groundwater was treated through this and then cleaned up and reinfiltrated through the site here. And you can actually see some of the signs of that on this particular aerial photo. Today it looks a little bit different. The property is now locked and vacant. There's a fence that goes around it. Those canals, those infiltration basins, those treatment basins were cleaned out and backfilled. And there are still some groundwater monitoring wells on site, and that's how we sample the underground groundwater. And then soil gas wells. What is soil gas? That's the air and the pore spaces between the individual grains of sand and rock that are underground. And believe it or not, some of these chemicals can volatilize from the groundwater, from underground, and be in those pore spaces, and they can move around, just like methane. And methane is one of those chemicals too. And so we use those soil gas wells to basically take a small amount of soil vapor from between those sand grains and sample that, send those samples to a laboratory for analysis. And then for talking about that groundwater pathway, here is a map from 2021. We use contour maps, not unlike a topographic map of the surface of the ground. We use contour maps to actually map the elevation of the ground water underneath that flows through these sand grains, this fill material as it's flowing out. And you can see each one of these lines represents roughly about a 1 foot drop in elevation here. And so based on some measurements that were done in around 2015, 2016, groundwater flows about a foot per day. So a groundwater that started out up here, it would take about a week to flow underground and go out towards Muskegon Lake. And that's actually fairly fast compared to some areas of the site. And of course, that can vary based upon the level of Muskegon Lake. Springtime, when Muskegon Lake is higher, groundwater flows are going to slow down a little bit. And times like right now, where Muskegon Lake is a little bit lower, Lake Michigan's down because of the summer months, groundwater might be flowing slightly faster. So there's been quite a bit of sampling out there, and we know a lot about some of these contaminants and a little about others. But obviously, there's having such a rich industrial history, there's a lot of contaminants out there. One of the hot ones that we're particularly concerned about out there is methane, and then that's actually what this response activity plan is dealing with primarily, and the volatilization to indoor air and fire and explosion criteria that we have. The volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds, those can contribute to that also. Of course, we have some metals out there from buried wastes, including some power plant wastes from the burning of coal, even the residual coal that might be out there in certain portions of the site. That lime pile results in areas that have groundwater and sediments and soils that have high pH. In the old canal, that sinuous canal area, there are some dioxins. Thankfully, that's at depth. And then Karen already talked about PFAS, and that's been out there at fairly high concentrations. It was 75 million gallons of groundwater was pumped out of there and treated for PFAS there. So, but PFAS contamination remains. And again, We do have potentially explosive concentrations of methane out there throughout the site, but it's especially high in the northeastern portion of that site. And I'll get into that a little bit more in coming slides. But we've seen it as high as 62.2%, and that's our action level is 1.5%, which is a fraction of the lower explosive limit of methane, and I'll talk a little bit more about that there. So you can see that clearly methane is important for us out here, and that's what this submittal is dealing with. So with that, because of all these contaminants out there, I want to hand it back to Karen. She'll talk a little bit more about due care.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, so on our next slide here, we just kind of wanted to make sure that it's clear to everybody that for their due care obligation, that applies to all contaminants on site, not just methane or volatiles that are part of the vapor intrusion pathway that this plan is specific to, but any contamination on the site. And Section 7A of Part 201, it does lay out the obligations of a current owner or operator of what they have. So we just wanted everyone to kind of be aware that this is their obligations that they'll have. So first one being, a general obligation for any owner or operator is that they're responsible for using the property safely. And this depends entirely on the property use and is very site specific. There are things obviously that owners can do to make the property safer, to keep people on the property from coming into contact with that contamination, which is part of this response activity plan. The developer is proposing to have a certain style construction of a building to cut off that pathway. That's where that comes into play. The owner is also responsible for making proper notifications to make sure the right people know the property is contaminated, especially people who are to come on site, live on site, recreate on site, work on site, utilities, construction, anything of that nature. So that could also include tenants, letting them know in a lease agreement or a purchase agreement for potential homeowners or some other way that let them know what the risks are there so they know how to use the property safely and what to do if there's an issue. Um, the new owner is also responsible for notifying utility workers, like I said, that there's contamination on the property and where it is. So the workers are notified and they can take proper health and safety precautions. And the third bullet there is about due care obligations begin the moment the owner or operator becomes aware that the property is contaminated. So obviously there already is awareness. We have it documented. We're having this meeting. You can go in our file and look. We have all of that publicly available. So that's when that obligation starts. And they have to continually think about this. This isn't a one and done type of situation. And this is for any Part 201 facility, we call it, any site in the state of Michigan that has known contamination above our cleanup criteria is considered a facility. So anyone who owns and operates that, have these obligations to think about. Some of them are just a little bit smaller sites, a little bit more manageable. Obviously, when we're dealing with these larger sites, 123 acres, it does become more complex. You just need to have things really well organized and laid out there for folks to understand. Finally, I have on there that due care is self-implemented, which means they have to implement this on their own. Um, you know, Someone can go in and develop a property on their own without asking for our approval. So the fact that Parkland Properties, submitted this response activity plan, I think is a good thing because there is no law requiring them to submit it to us for our review and approval. It is a voluntary thing to get EGLE buy-in and review and approval. What they have to do, though, is continually document and have ready at our requests that they are in compliance with all their due care obligations. So under these rules, the state is allowed to request that documentation at any point in time so that the owner or operator has to continually be maintaining the inspection records, any other things that they're required to do, notification records that, hey, yes, we've notified people, we're making sure people are safe and they're not coming into contact with this information. And they have to maintain that in case we come knocking and ask for that documentation. And we do that, especially on sites where we have concerns that, people, we want to make sure people are being protected. So just wanted to kind of give that background. And we think it's a really important aspect of our program. And we do take it pretty seriously, especially when it comes to risks such as methane. Oops, I went too fast. So this response activity plan that we're talking about was submitted on July 28th, 2025, the end of July. Was received by our office through our RIDE database, online database. A lot of our reports come in now. Since we received it at that time, we started with our district review with our project manager and Jay and myself. And then we've been bringing in our other specialists within the division, within EGLE, as well as an outside consultant who we have contracted with to support us at the state on sites dealing with methane. So we have been involving that consultant as well. Um, and we wanted to, once we started looking into this plan, we realized, this is going to definitely have significant public interest. And we wanted to provide this opportunity to the public for you to look at this plan, trying to have this meeting right now today to go over the plan, explain kind of how it's laid out, what it's covering, give the 30-day public comment period. So this public comment period goes through kind of near the end of October, October 21st, 2025. So you have until then. It started last week on September 22nd. And so we hope that this will give folks plenty of time to get their written comments to us. And we'll give more directions on where you can submit the comments to. If you want to reach out to any of us in between you submitting our comments, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So this actual plan, let's see here. I don't know why it's giving me a problem. Okay. Has our table of contents here. It's a 2 volumes. It is linked on our website. So there it is kind of a larger document, but basically there's kind of some main sections that you would want to take a look at when you're reviewing this. So you're going to look at the table of contents and you're going to see a summary section. Usually has an executive summary, which by the way, there is kind of a major typo that we have noticed and that we were made aware of in the executive summary. The submitter is aware of it, and that's something that's definitely going to have to be fixed in any other, resubmittal of a final plan. But it's the third paragraph in the executive summary. There's a not missing. So it talks about explosivity or fire issues associated with the subsurface methane. It says are known or documented to have occurred, and it's supposed to say are not known or documented to have occurred. So just wanted to throw that out there. But if you see any sort of sentences like that that are in there that don't make sense, reach out, let us know. And we can kind of be like, oh yeah, that's something we can comment on as EGLE to say you need to elaborate on this or explain this or address this in any resubmittal in our comments back. It also, within this report, has the conceptual site model or CSM. So that talks about the history of the site, the geology, what the subsurface looks like, what the depth to water is, what kind of soils do we have. We have a lot of fill on this property, which Jay's going to go over some figures in a little bit that shows just how thick that fill is, because obviously this was built out within the lake. So all of that is in a portion of this. A summary of the design of the proposed buildings that are going to be on here. So obviously the proposed developer is within a phase one area. I'll show of the property is going to develop 190 to 200 homes. That's going to have a special design to prevent that vapors from getting into the house. Um, and then within this plan, it has the implementation overview. So it talks about what kind of permits they're going to get, the timing of that, the due care obligations, like we talked about, because they would have due care during the construction as well. So when they're moving soils around or dewatering things, digging foundations, all of that has to have special precautions because we are on the site of environmental contamination. Any soil removed off site has to go to an appropriate licensed landfill facility. There would need to be special, watering to make sure dust is not leaving the site, all of that kind of thing. And then operation and maintenance actually does come into this as well because the proposed mitigation is, a podium style home, and that is going to need to be maintained forever and make sure that it's being maintained appropriately and not blocked. And there is some meters that are going to be used as a precautionary measure as well. And so those need calibration and they have to be checked. So all of that is what's lumped into that operation and maintenance as well. There also is a section in this report that has the draft restrictive covenant. So this has not been filed yet, but it was provided to EGLE just to kind of let us know what they're thinking of some sort of land use restriction that would be recorded on the deed of the property. And we can talk about that more in a little bit. Um, so they have that. They have an implementation schedule of the timing of this phase one development that's closest to the waterway there to the lake. You'll see on the map coming up. And then kind of the majority of this is going to be the supportive tables, the historic sampling, analytical report, some maps and figures. So that's kind of just a broad overview of what is in this specific submittal. So here is the phase one proposal area. Let me want that bigger. You'll see it's the area highlighted in the yellow. It is right along Muskegon Lake, right there. And you can kind of see it also includes some utilities and road access ways. That's what this response activity plan, this submittal is covering, just this phase one area specific to the vapor intrusion pathway for volatile organic compounds and methane. There is proposed to be between 190 to 200 residential homes built there. There is some spaces for recreational and public use. You'll notice in the phase one area as well. Some lake access as well, and the supporting roadways and infrastructure. And that's kind of what's just outlined in this box. It's kind of a separate note. If you have questions and you want more detail on the overall proposed development, we can share some contact information after this presentation, with the city. They have an approved PUD from 2023 with the developers themselves. So you can kind of see what, as of now, the full development plan is, how many pocket parks are there? Where's the trails? Where are those going to be located to connecting some of those bike trails? So all of that can be considered. Oh, something's going on. Okay, that was weird. Google was showing up. So we can share that information as well. But this is just kind of a high level overview of that. Um, and again, this was from, and these figures are taken right from the submittal. This is the infrastructure. So that's outlined in the orange area. So there's going to be road work, there's going to be utilities, and all those due care obligations associated with keeping the construction and utility workers safe will also need to be addressed as well. And I think now it's back to Jay.
Yeah, I will claim guilty for that, Karen, because
It's okay.
I was like, wanted to, I was planned PUD, PUD was that, for some reason I thought the U was urban, but it's planned unit
Unit
development.
development. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I was like, man, I wanted to say what was PUD because that's one of those, we love to throw acronyms out
Yep.
there, and that's what we do. So yeah, that's my fault. Sorry about it. It opened on that window. Of course, it had to open on that window.
That's okay.
Um, so what does the development here look like? So Karen showed you that phase one area. And that's outlined in this particular map in yellow. And they in this particular map here, they do actually show a little bit of maybe a future phase two, just in context there. But really, again, we're worried about phase one and some of the sampling that was done to support that. And I apologize in advance for kind of the scale of this particular map. You'll see it on the version that you download, but basically you've got a handful of numbers, and some of these are at different events. One, like for example, this is February of 2024, and here's of March of 2025. And for context, with regard to vapors, the winter time is actually one of the times of the year that presents the highest vapor intrusion potential because there might be a layer of frozen soil at the top of the surface of the ground. If there's homes present on above a vapor source, those homes can actually act to have like a chimney effect of actually sucking vapors up out of the ground in a sense due to the heating of the home. So this winter time snapshot of the property with regard to vapors is a useful one for us as scientists to understand a little bit better. There are a lot of vapor wells out here. In fact, there's many more vapor samples that were collected in other portions of the site that aren't shown on this particular map. But these are vapor samples that were collected that are relevant to phase one. And again, our action level here, this is right here at that 1.25% of methane by volume. And that the LEL, again, the lower explosive limit. So methane in a mixture, you need a level of something that's combustible and a level of oxygen. And so from 5% of methane to 15% of methane is what they call that explosive range. And so, of course, we get, if anything is at that lower explosive limit, that's especially dangerous because any sort of spark could potentially get in there. So EGLE's action level for methane is 1.5%, which is about a quarter of the lower explosive limit. And we set that because that's an early warning for us that potentially unsafe conditions could develop. So as it's written in our guidance, fire and explosion can result if methane it can accumulate in a confined space, like a home or an underground structure, sewer, whatever it is, at a concentration between 5 and 15%. And that oxygen needs to be there, but also when an ignition source is there. So electrical outlets, appliances with electric motors, for example, even static electricity, pilot light. You might go to light your gas stove, but there's enough of a spark there, or of course open flames, gas grills, cigarette lighters, etc. But you need to have the right amount of methane, and you also need oxygen and a source there. So a lot of these results, clearly the ones that are boxed in red here and circled, the triangle sample locations are circled on the map there. These results do exceed the EGLE action level there and the LEL. Some of them even exceed the upper explosive limit, but that's important because even if it's above the upper explosive limit, any sort of mixing could occur to lower it back down into that explosive range. So that's why we take this super seriously. Thankfully, in addition to this data point, this percent by volume of the gas, we also require a flow, and that's measured by the differences in pressure. So just like water flows from high to low, gas is going to flow based upon the pressure in the air, and it's going to want to go from one place to another. And if there's not a pressure differential, then that gas isn't moving anywhere. So what they have measured out here is generally very little pressure differential. And so that is a good thing that speaks towards the safety of this site. However, regardless of that, due to these high concentrations, we're still taking it very seriously here. And based upon our guidance, That's why this podium style construction, which I'll show you a picture of here later on, is the preferred option out there. Where the heck did all this methane come from? Well, a lot of you are familiar with methane at landfills or even bubbles that might come up from the bottom of a swamp or whatever. We get at this particular site organic fill and even naturally occurring organic matter that could have been buried as they expanded this property outwards. There was some naturally occurring organic material out there, and so here's a map that's based upon some drilling that was done out there, primarily for geotechnical purposes to understand how stable the soil was for redevelopment purposes. But it gives us a good picture of some of the thicknesses of the fill out there, and you can see that there's a couple spots that exceed 20 feet of organic rich fill material, and it's primarily in that northeastern corner, which is also, again, if I just go back a slide, you can see, there's a lot of that methane up over there, and then over here in the far west, and then forward one more slide here. Here's that thick organic area, and then over here in the east where we saw that methane. So leaves, trees, these pulps, the sludges, all of that, seaweed even, all of that degrades when there's limited oxygen underground and develops methane there. So geologists like to look at things in 3D. And one of the ways we do that here is through a cross section. So this is basically, if this was like cake, if the site was a cake and we were to take a slice of that cake, this is not a very tasty cake, but it would give you at least a look at what the soils were. And we have some significant fill up here at the top, and that's going to be described as many, many different things. It can be um, have sand and other sediments in it. It can have some ash and lime and all sorts of things have been seen up here. And in this particular drawing here, again, they used a gray color here to signify the organic fill material. And you can see that here, east and west on that. And then the lake level is actually way up here. You can see that little blue line towards the top. So they went quite deep out here. These borings go quite deep. You can see that this whole area is underlain by a very, very large, thick clay layer. And in between the fill up towards the top and the organics halfway through, we do see some sand and these different colors. The redder, the better from a construction standpoint. So again, this is an engineering drawing that we're using to learn more about what's underground. So red means it's nice and firm, whereas some of the blue stuff is going to be softer. So they'll have to accommodate that through their engineering process. But this really, again, here's our fill, and that's the source of our methane out there. Um, so what is the proposal? So just this year, back in April, EGLE released, after many years of development, a guidance document that's entitled Developing on or Near Methane Generating Sources. And so I think Mike's going to share that if he hasn't already. This guidance document, it spells out a lot of what I just talked about, like what is methane and how does it get to be in the environment there, naturally and man-made, so to speak. And we would consider this based upon the type of home that's there. This is general residential home, and that's part of the need to trigger, part of what triggers this particular construction style. And the plan does propose podium style, and that seems to it was designed at least to meet the EGLE guidance requirements out there. We have basically conceptual designs at this point because more information is needed as they continue their design and engineering process. And so we're going to get even another chance to look at the more detailed engineering designs. As Karen mentioned too, there's a long-term operation and maintenance out there and those restrictive covenants to notify the future homeowners and operators out there that are present. So this is the table. I don't expect you to be able to read that on your computer or TV screens there, but basically you can see we have different action levels, and then based upon the different styles based on the different pressures. Again, we talked about that pressure differential, different things that that a builder developer could consider when they're doing that. So. So they're going to cut off that pathway that we talked about earlier using that air gap. That air gap effectively cuts that road out of it. It's like a almost like a bridge over that road that road full of traffic that I was talking about. So in this case, it's kind of the opposite. Gives this methane a chance to not get the cars to not get in the road in the first place. It's like a construction detour. And so these areas underneath the building can't be used for storage and they got to be kept open. They can put a mesh around there to keep the critters out of there. They can't be used again for storage or any sort of occupied reason there. Um, there's a minimum thickness. The thickness of that, in this case, it's about 2 feet, and that's designed based upon a lot of site-specific factors, including snow. Regretfully for some of us, snow is the S word here in Michigan, and based we got a lot of snow, and they have done a meteorological study out there to say what is the maximum average snow accumulated thickness in this area. And so while we get a lot of snow, especially along the lake shore, kind of comes and goes, it melts, and we see larger snow piles. So where they put snow is an important consideration in this. We got to make sure snow is not plowed up against it and that those air gaps are maintained. Underground, um, vapors can migrate along utilities. So they have in this proposal uh, included vapor dams, basically blockages along utilities that are cut through the soils because those backfilled soils can present um, migration pathways through there. And then they will be maintained, this whole system will be maintained by a new dedicated nonprofit business entity. And so that entity is going to be charged with maintaining these meters, making sure they're monitored and calibrated. And then again, the key out here is the restrictive covenant filed on the property deed and also information included in real estate documents. And really, these are geared to make sure that future people are aware and any building that's done out there is this information is conveyed to them so that they don't accidentally do something that could cause an unsafe condition. So let's look at some concepts here. And so this is, again, this is a cross section. This is that pie that I was talking about earlier. I think I said cake, so now my mind is towards pie. Um, and you can see down here we've got this is the floor of the building. In fact, here's the floor of the garage. And then right underneath here we do have here's our air gap. And that's a minimum of 2 feet with posts in there. And this is a fairly common construction technique that's used in some oceanside areas there too, where water is the would be contaminant due to storm surge and so forth. So this isn't an uncommon thing. It's just somewhat uncommon around here. But you can Google and see lots of pictures of pillar podium style construction. Again, this whole method here is to cut out that route, to give that methane an off ramp, to get out of that path from flowing into the building. Here's another picture of a 3-story concept. But I like this picture here because it also gives us, we not only do we have the 3-story concept, we kind of get an idea of like what does this look from the top down with the garage here on one end and the living space on the other. But it also shows us here where they're going to have an example. The TIP stands for typical. There's going to be an indoor air methane meter. There's going to be a methane meter in the garage. There's going to be some equipment mounted on the outside. And then, of course, this is an example where the utilities are going to come up out of the ground, and those are going to be sealed off with a trench dam or equivalent out there. So in conclusion about this particular report, it does summarize for us the information that is known about potential vapor intrusion sources and methane sources out there that are proposing a risk to this particular part of the development. It gives us a look at the conceptual design of the podium style construction, and it was done to align with current EGLE policy, and that's what's under review right now by us. We'll have another crack at further review here once final designs are submitted, and we'll know more about that then. And then, of course, as Karen mentioned earlier, the owner has many other due care obligations, and a prospective buyer would have these same due care obligations that aren't covered in this response activity plan. So that's something that will be on
And
with you.
just
But
something I wanted to note as well for the number three, those schematics that Jay had just shown, those are in, I think, volume two that's on our website of the plan. It's in one of the appendices, so you'll be able to see larger versions of those
way at the
included
end. Yep.
way at the end. Yep. So if you're looking for those in there right now, it's toward the end. And yeah, those are the preliminary, based on the information they have right now. That's how they're proposing to design it. But in any sort of final design, it does require an actual sign off by a professional engineer as well. So those, if you look at our guidance out for methane sites, it does talk about that requirement. I just want to note that's why it's currently not on those plans, since those aren't the final schematics, kind of the what they have so far.
Right, as you get to that reality check of what the actual designs look like, those are the meat and potatoes, what
Hmm.
exactly materials are going to be used, and those details, those will be signed off ultimately by a PE and by
Hmm.
EGLE. So, yep. So where we at now, the again, we want we're asking here to take a gander at the proposal that's in the response activity plan. We're going to take comments as Karen said through October 21st. Once we've got those comments, we'll prepare a response document, and those will be posted on the SAPPI website that we have there. A lot of you probably found your way here through michigan.gov /former SAPPI. And then once we have all of that together, we will submit a formal response to the submitter as to whether that's approved, denied, or approved with conditions. And then that will be the answer that they need based upon this particular submittal. So we want to hear from you. I think Karen said that a couple times, and it's true. Um, uh, Go ahead and mail that to me or email that to the EGLE RRD former SAPPI address that's on the screen there. And again, that's a dedicated email address for this site, and that's a great spot
Yeah,
to
we do
submit your
have one
comments.
person who's listening in by phone. So hopefully, we can get this information to you, but I'll just spell out the email address box real quick for you, in case you're not also watching it. Maybe you just have your phone for audio. But you can submit your written comment to EGLE-RRD dash former SAPPI. So that's FORMER SAPPI, the at symbol Michigan.gov. So that's the email address, sorry, that you can submit your comments to. But if you want to talk to us further, anyone who has any questions on how to get us those comments, um, we'll make sure you can get that information. Try to get it. You'll need to get it to us before that October 21st um, deadline.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
yeah. And so I think that wraps up our talking, and we'll hand it over to Mike.
Great, thank you. One quick thing, it looked like on your wrap-up slide and on the how to submit a comment slide, those email addresses were different, and I want to make sure
Oh,
it's at Michigan all spelled out .gov, right? Not at mi.gov. Because I think
right. It
on the
should be
previous.
Michigan. It should be spelled all the way out.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure. That's what I put in the chat.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just wanted to double check.
Well, both will work. Thankfully, it does have a
Yeah.
mirror. So,
Oh,
yeah,
good. So the email
yeah,
address is smarter than I am. I appreciate it.
yeah, yeah,
That's good.
yeah. We all do actually. If you ever want to get lazy with yours, you can use the mi.gov too. So,
Good to know. I'm very
yep,
reachable. That's good.
exactly.
So a couple questions that have come in. I like this question because I feel like a lot of people probably have the same question. Regarding the explosion risk of methane, what would that look like? I know you talked about the pieces that are required, right? Methane and oxygen and ignition, right? So on this site, how would an explosion be triggered? Could an explosion be triggered?
So, I'll take it. Yeah,
Okay.
I can take a quick crack at that again. So if we had methane that was moving, so that wanted to move out of the ground, and it could accumulate into an area that had oxygen. Of course, explosions can be triggered by any sort of ignition source, so it could be any sort of spark. So, but you have to have all three. You have to have the ignitable substance, in this case, methane. You have to have oxygen, and you have to have that ignition source. And so our goal here is to cut out the methane. And thankfully, if it's going into that air gap there that they're proposing with the podium style construction, it's going to mix with the ambient air very fast, and that percent is going to go away. So it's the air gap again makes the combustion percentage too low to explode. So any spark, but we don't even want to get to that point.
Right. And
And
I don't
so, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say we don't have any currently, it's vacant right now, so we don't have the structures there for it to accumulate in. In the past, when SAPPI was operating and working, oh, I'm in the office and the lights just turned off. Um, they I don't believe that we are aware of any explosion incidents and whatnot, but that is something that obviously we want to look into and see if anyone is aware of any history or articles on that. Sometimes we'll reach out to local fire department to get information on that as well. But I think some folks here listening in seem to live near this property as well. And I know they have some questions too. Um, that we especially want to get to. I think, um, Mike, is that the next question there?
Yeah, yep,
Okay.
about some neighbors and their greatest concern being health risks to themselves and to neighbors during development and after. Are you able to speak to health risk concerns for neighbors of the property?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is a major concern for EGLE during any redevelopment because that's actually one of the largest potential risks for the dust particulate pathway there. So making sure that dust is controlled during construction is the main part. The fencing is actually another very major part of their due care obligation during that. And again, certain portions of the site do and do not, or maybe not any longer have potentially hazardous soils near the surface. So obviously, those are all our concerns too. So making sure that both workers and especially off-site people are protected from fugitive dust and any sort of track out that might occur. So that's part of their due care obligation that they'll have to manage.
Great, thank you. Here's a question on, we talked about the snow buildup with some change in climate in West Michigan experiencing more extreme storm events, including heavy rains. Have we considered, does the submittal consider how climate change may impact this phase of the development, specifically in terms of the methane?
I could answer as a somewhat educated guess, but I think I'm going to phone a friend on this one here because we do have some methane experts on our panel. How's that sound, Karen? Could we maybe
Yeah.
tag?
And then we can, maybe they might have an answer on if that
Yeah.
is thought about or talked about in our guidance
Hmm.
as well. So Nick or Sam, I don't know if you're able to
It-
help.
yeah, I'll jump on. I mean, we didn't necessarily consider that as part of our guidance, things like, I mean, really what we're trying to do with in this particular case, the podium style, I mean, we want to prohibit that methane from building up. So rains and things like that. A lot of that, I mean, we're decreasing the pore space when we get them filled with water, so less methane can come up. So heavy rains and things like that will probably decrease, the amount of methane that can come up anyway, but we're keeping that air gap. So really those kinds of things shouldn't affect the design and for as far as the mitigation and how we're handling that.
That's a good question, though.
Great question.
Yep, thank you. Will similar podium style design be required? And I paused because we're not requiring podium style design. That's what's being proposed, and that's what we're reviewing, right? So, but I'm going to read it, and we'll try and understand the intent of the question. Will similar podium style design be required for other phases of the development, or is it that the area selected for phase one is the only area affected by these concentrations of methane?
That's a great question.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Dusty. So it has to be a both and situation. So we know there's a high potential for methane on many portions of the site and other volatiles. So it goes back to that EGLE guidance document too. So remember we had those different use categories that are out there. So podium style construction is an option for this general residential type of development. There are other potential development styles out there. For example, there was a boat warehouse, and there are some other slab on grade type structures that were in the PUD, the plan that was proposed historically. Every single one of those structures is going to have to be evaluated and will have its own special design. The podium style is always an option that they might employ. So that would be down the road. I think that answered the question.
Yeah, and it
Well,
has
now
to,
I can't see
yeah,
anymore.
take into account the specifics of whatever phase area is. Kind of like you're saying, we need the very specific conceptual site model, all the sampling data, what we know, um, what kind of information are we, taking into account there? What kind of soils do we have? What methane levels do we know in those areas too?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Um, this question might be tough to quantify. How much is the explosion risk expected to decrease in this remediation redevelopment?
Hmm. Well, I don't think we have any expectation that the explosion risks would decrease unless the methane sources were removed. So it's possible that over time, over many, many decades, the sources of methane could eventually be degraded to a point where they're not making methane anymore, but that's probably not in a human lifespan. So that's why we are again, this isn't remediating anything as part of this redevelopment. This is a mitigation method to minimize the effect of or break that exposure pathway there. So the oh, sorry, when that
The
goes away, that
explosion
actually.
risk, though, I think maybe they were asking for in this design for
Oh, I
those
see.
homes.
Okay.
Um,
So I would think,
so
right, like if we, knowing the site conditions now, and now we
Yeah.
have this mitigate this, if this plan is approved and we have this mitigation plan in place, this is how it's designed and constructed. How much does that actually reduce that explosive hazard, that risk of explosion?
It's supposed
right.
to completely break
Hmm.
that expo. It should 100%. It should 100%. And just in case if something were to go wrong, they also have monitors to verify that, Nick. Is that
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, we should completely break that. We should not have any methane accumulation, but we also have an early warning of the monitors underneath to just a sort of a belt and suspenders type approach that we get an early warning before anything bad happens. So that is the part of the plan there.
Great, thank you. And Nick, maybe before you disappear, I'm guessing this one's going to go to you. Is Eagle aware of a similar site with this solution in place?
Not in Michigan. Places, I think we get a lot of our guidance from like Los Angeles that has a lot of methane and they have similar type construction and codes. We pulled stuff from North Carolina that's got similar type. So nothing that we have. This is, I believe, our first one here, but it has happened. And like I said, places like Los Angeles that there's a lot of naturally occurring methane. You think of the tar pits and what have you and things out there. So they're pretty common in sort of their construction styles and how they mitigate that risk.
Great, thank you. Um, Jay, maybe to build off a comment you made earlier in a previous answer, do you know, and maybe a question for somebody else, but you mentioned it, is the methane levels out here, are they likely to increase due to organic breakdown over time? Like, are these levels, are they expected to be get higher over time as organic breakdown continues?
There has been some modeling done regarding that, but I think it involves they use some landfill models using kind of the volume of sources there, and the amount of oxygen. It's already without oxygen or anaerobic underground. So um, we would assume that it's reached a steady state. And so that amount of breakdown and methanogenesis, the methane generation that's occurring in there, is probably stabilized at this point. So it's almost impossible to say whether it would increase or decrease in any human scale of time. And that's why it's especially important to use a construction design like they're proposing in the response activity plan.
Great, thank you.
We just can't predict it.
Yeah. Um, there's a question here that I expect is probably forefront on a lot of folks' mind. That obviously we talked about. This is the response activity plan that's in place. This is what we're talking about. And that PFAS has not been a part of this conversation tonight. So is PFAS part of this phase one construction plan? Is PFAS a part of that overall conversation? Even though it's not a part of this response activity plan?
So for EGLE, it definitely is. This is an MPART site. There is legacy PFAS contamination out here. As far as the phase one development, what the developer has submitted to us for the response activity plan, they focus their response activity plan on really the acute immediate risks, which is the methane explosivity and flammability concerns, which obviously are also very concerning to EGLE. That is an immediate issue um, of a home having flammable levels and explosive levels of methane in it. And so I think they know the developer, I don't want to speak for them, but they know that that is an extreme concern and kind of one of the most extreme pathways that they would have to deal with. For PFAS, for their due care obligations, that's an easier contamination to mitigate by providing drinking water, knowing where it is, obviously, not irrigating with it. They're not going to be putting in any wells, making sure any superficial soils are safe, which they would have to do anyway for other due care things. So while that they do have due care obligations related to PFAS, I know they are aware of that as well as the other contaminants. But I think the reason why this response activity plan was focused on the vapors is because that's going to affect the design of the development the most. Um, and so I think in the beginning, I mentioned that, PFAS, while it's not covered in this meeting, we do anticipate future meetings. Eagle's happy to have an Abby Hendershots on this call too. Have MPART update meetings that the state can provide updates on the PFAS. And other opportunities for additional conversations on that because we do know that it is a concern to folks, especially with Muskegon Lake there and what could be getting into the lake from the site. Um, so we want to acknowledge that for sure, but it just was not part of this submittal that was submitted to us.
Great, Karen. Thank you. Are you the best contact for other questions not related to this submittal?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And
So yeah, so go ahead.
we'll provide my contact info in our follow-up, right, Mike, and
Yeah,
all of our contact info, but um, we can continue to figure out the best way to get that information out and figure out a future meeting.
great. Thank you.
Hmm.
Um, in the other regions of the country that were referenced, with naturally occurring methane, where podium style design is used, are the geotechnical properties expected to be similar to this site? And are the geotechnical properties at the former mill property here sufficient to support this style of design with those subsurface organic layers?
You may take that because yeah, and
Yeah,
I,
that'd be
I don't.
great.
I would assume that they're probably not. I think there'd have to, there'll have to be some sort of geotech study to design that, and I don't know that that's necessarily um, Eagle's purview. I mean, that's a structural piece of the construction. You know, we're approving this conceptual design right here, but there'll have to be a little bit more details and have a little bit more engineering go into it to assure that this structure, assure there's not going to be settling, all those pieces and anything you would with any sort of foundation, you know. And so I think that's to be determined as to exactly how they go about doing it and
Hmm.
how we go about engineering that. So not something that was in this. And again, I would suspect probably not if we were talking about other places in here, just given the fill and what have you. So it's going to be, each one's going to be unique and site specific.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
Is there a way to neutralize the methane on site? So, Jay, you mentioned that what we have here is really a mitigation instead of a remediation, and so I think the question being, is there a way to address that source?
You know, I'm not aware of any, but I'm not the methane expert. Well, I mean, obviously thermal remediation is what we're trying to avoid out here. But Nick, are you aware of any sort of methane remediation neutralization?
Uh, no, I mean there's certainly different ways to capture and vent and things of that nature
Yeah.
that's been used. Yeah, I mean the thing with methane, it does break down in the presence of oxygen pretty
Oxygen.
rapidly, you know,
Yeah.
so it does naturally degrade over time. I mean, that's a pretty, so the fact that, you know, Jake kind of mentioned that there really isn't a lot of pressure, that would suggest that over time there will be a lot of natural breakdown of it. But as far as the ways to neutralize it, I don't know that I'm aware of anything other than sort of capture and containment.
Great, thank you. Um, there's a couple questions here on kind of I think the due care obligations as a whole, on the construction project as a whole. Um, This one's about the timeline, I think, here for the construction, and any additional remediation work that may need to be done. So, will the groundwater surface water interface contaminants be addressed before any construction? With that follow-up being the concern that they have is the structures, the development impeding any needed remediation. And I know we're starting to stray a little bit outside of this the plan that we're needing to address. So if we need some additional follow-up, feel free to let me know that. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always something, especially such a large site, with such a huge history where the current owner, they didn't cause the contamination. They're not liable under 201 or due care to, have to remediate and clean that up, right? Their obligations are to prevent it from becoming worse. Um, to prevent folks from coming into contact with it. And if there was, let's say, some sort of ongoing remediation system or ongoing activities, they can't impede that. Um, Currently, there is not any on the site. I'm not saying there never would be, but that is something that we have mentioned, to the developer, to kind of keep in the back of their mind that, if there is future work that's done out here for some of the legacy pollution, that would have to be done by the state. We would definitely have to then work around any sort of development that's there at that point.
great, thank you. And that
Hmm.
might kind of quickly dovetail into that the due care requirements for that owner would not necessarily cover the drinking water source. Any addressing of that.
Correct. They just had to provide clean drinking water to their occupants. I know that the drinking public drinking water supplies are monitored, across the state, for PFAS, and obviously there's concern about different various PFAS sites in Muskegon County, that do have PFAS going into surface waters that eventually, make its way to out to Lake Michigan too. And that's a concern. I'm here in Grand Rapids, and we get our water supply out from Lake Michigan, and there's detectable levels of PFAS out there. But as far as due care obligations for this site, those do not apply in that regard.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
Um, It looks like one question here that I think actually speaks to our the slide we have up, right? Is this going to happen no matter what? Like this project, this plan, is this?
Mhm.
And I think that's really what we the intent of this meeting today was to share information with you. Hopefully, get comments that are appropriate for the plan, so that we can make an informed decision about the response activity plan that's in front of us. And so. I, I will ask that question, right? Is this going to happen no matter what?
Right. So EGLE, I just want it to be clear that, we implement 201 and 213. That's our lane here at RRD. So we cannot, and in the fact that they submitted this plan, we can't necessarily even require them like, hey, thou shall for your developments, get our approval. We can ask for them to prove what they're doing is safe kind of after the fact or while they're building it, we can ask for that. But us at EGLE, we don't have the authority to prevent them. So if there are concerns about the development as a whole, from continuing, that those comments, while you can share them with us and it would be part of our record if you want to go that route, which we've seen done in a lot of other communities, even if it isn't necessarily, part of our plan, folks want it to be out there and they want us to include it in our records that these are the concerns of the community. And I think that can be powerful within itself. I still would encourage you to submit your comment, even if it isn't necessarily part of this plan, but we just wouldn't be able to have it sway necessarily our review of this plan under 201. I would, encourage you to reach out to the county and local unit of government regarding the development if you have concerns about that, the local unit of government, um, because unfortunately, us at Eagle, we can't, you know, we don't hold the keys, if you will, to saying a development can or can't happen.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
And I will say, looks like we're slowing down on the Q&A. So I will start to wrap up and thank everyone who attended. I think I saw up to 53, 55 folks in attendance. So I really appreciate everyone coming out, listening, engaging, asking questions. Karen, you said it. It sounds like there's a lot of interest. We'll look at scheduling, some more time in the future to just, can keep the conversation going.
Yep.
Just because we end today doesn't mean that we're done. So you can reach out to Jay, reach out to Karen. We're going to share an email with you, hopefully by the end of the week, with, like I said, a link to the recording, copy the presentation slides, all the links that I put in the webinar chat today, as well as some other information. I want to make sure we share our Do Care page and some FAQs and other things that I was thinking about along the way. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks to everybody who answered questions on our panel here today. Any last comments, Jay or Karen, before we sign off?
Just thank you all.
Cool.
Yep. We
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.